Before we get started, I'd just like to take a second to remember Michael Kelker, who is a professor that was here at our school last year. He passed away. But he is the founder of Democracy Days. It was his idea about 22 years ago to put together this event where we could get together as a college and discuss issues related to democracy. When I started working here in 2010, it was one of my first experiences with SCC. And ever since 2013, I've been like a diehard Democracy Days fan. In fact, I'm doing all 3 sessions today, which is like a lot. But I just love Democracy Days so much, and I just wanted to acknowledge Michael Kelker and the work that he did here at SCC and remember him for everything that he gave to the college and to his spirit of activism in St. Louis. Okay, so this presentation is about Greenwood Cemetery, which was well, I'm going to read you my introduction that I have. So Greenwood Cemetery was founded in 1874 by German immigrant Hermann Kruger as the first non-sectarian African-American cemetery in the St. Louis area. It remained under the ownership of Kruger until 1894, when he sold the cemetery to his son-in-law, Adolf Felsch. It was controlled and operated by the Felsch family until 1981, when they sold it outside the family. Much of its decline happened under owner Solomon Rooks, who purchased Greenwood in 1993, with the intent of winning the contract for reinterment of displaced burials from another local black cemetery, Washington Park, which was uprooted by the expansion of the city's international airport. Unable to obtain the contract, Rooks failed to care for the cemetery, lacking the necessary funds for basic maintenance. Severely neglected, the cemetery became overgrown and unrecognizable until 1999, when the Friends of Greenwood Cemetery organized to rescue the site as a significant place of local African American history and rescue those buried there from commercial development and relocation. In 2002, the Friends became owners, and in 2004, the cemetery was added to the National Register of Historic Places. In 2016, the Friends of Greenwood reorganized into Greenwood Cemetery Preservation Association, a 501c3 organization of which Shelley and Etta, who was supposed to be here today but was unable to make it, became prominent leaders and members, Raphael too. Much of the work of the association today is to preserve the story of the lives buried there, both well-known and ordinary. As with many other black cemeteries in the U.S., the grounds are not maintained by an endowment, and thus rely on the hard work of volunteers, mainly Raphael, to clear and maintain the grounds, document those buried there, and share their stories with any who will listen. Segregated in death as in life, Greenwood offers a powerful insight into the lives of black St. Louisans. In a time when black history is being actively suppressed by state and local policies, Greenwood, as a public history site, offers a way to circumvent the suppression of this story, engaging everyone who encounters it in the story of those who call Greenwood their final resting place. So that was the only formal statement, really, I think I'm going to follow. I wanted to share my relationship with Greenwood. Here's some pictures of what Greenwood looks like today. So it's a map of Greenwood. See that T-shape? I've become very familiar with that T-shape. I don't know if my laser works. Is this like section M over here? This is where you guys are clearing now?
Yes.
And how much of this do you have clear now? Do you have all of this clear?
More or less.
Yeah. When I first started coming, I think you only had like this much clear. So I started coming in 2019, and I remember when we started pushing back up into this area. And this area we couldn't even get to. But the last time I was at Greenwood, we got to that area. I was able to walk back and see it, which is pretty impressive.
I'm always reluctant to say how much we've cleared, because clearing is one thing, but maintaining is
Yes.
something totally different. You can clear a section, and 2 weeks later, it looks like you haven't even been there, because it grows so fast, and the cemetery is 32 acres. And it's kind of hard to maintain 32 acres, basically by yourself. So I'm always reluctant to say which section is clear, which section isn't clear, because it changes.
And I'll go into some more about like what we can do to help contribute to Greenwood. But Shelley, there's what, 50,000 people buried there? And how many records do we have?
Gosh. We have really a wonderful database that was created in the early 2000s. And of the 50,000 people that are buried there, I would say we probably have about 36,000 in our database. And that came from handwritten records and other records that were maintained by the previous owners. So we've been able to put that on a spreadsheet, on an Excel form. And so when people call us, we're able to say, this is where they're located, or we don't have a location for them yet, but we're hopeful. So actually what oftentimes our volunteers will help me with is documentation. When Raphael and some of his service volunteers come out, they're uncovering areas that had been covered for decades. And what we found is that some of those headstones are not in our database. So where someone like yourself will help me with is documenting what we don't have record of. And we just don't put them in the database, we also do research on that individual to make sure that their story is told properly.
So this is a picture of, this is the same area, right? This was a burial, of the headstone, the workshop, I forgot what it was called.
That was the old barn, and that was torn down really actually in the late 1990s. Subsequently, in that same spot, they erected a monument for Harriet Scott, and also for those who lived during her lifetime. We have over 6,000 people that lived during the time of enslavement, and so this recognizes their lives and honors them. It's kind of awkward here.
Oh, yep, sorry.
So no, those
These are some images, I found these in a newspaper article, I think that was from 2006. 16, is that when you guys got involved?
We started in 15.
15, okay. So this is what the cemetery grounds were looking like, and this is what they can look like if somebody is not there maintaining them. So that's the tree, right? That's got the bench under it now?
Yes.
Yeah. So now, like big trees fall down on a regular basis. And, so this is the type of maintenance that is really difficult to control. So I just wanted to really quick talk about my connection to Greenwood and try not to take too long so that you guys can ask questions if you have any. I am a cemetery enthusiast, I guess you could call myself. I'm a lifelong St. Louis resident. But I was not aware of Greenwood and the situation facing Black cemeteries in America. It is a national issue where Black cemeteries often do not have perpetual care or an endowment to maintain the grounds. And so this is a point of Black history that is being lost. So Greenwood has a few notable burials, which that's how I found out about Greenwood. I think I was visiting the site of Dred Scott's burial in Calvary Cemetery, and Dred Scott was part of a Supreme Court case that was really important in history. Should mention that I'm also a history teacher. But it was really important in history, but Harriet was also a co-litigant on that case. And at the time, I heard that we did not know where Harriet was buried, that her grave was unmarked and records were lost. And I heard that she had been buried in Greenwood, and I was talking to my neighbor, and I was talking about my classes and how I wanted to do service learning. And she said, you should look into Greenwood. So then I tracked down Shelley, and Shelley introduced me to Greenwood, and I was blown away because when I got there, I found out that they had found, through their research, Harriet Scott's burial site, and since then have marked it with a headstone. So now we do have that important information of this national case of importance, Supreme Court case, and Harriet is now being recognized in addition to her husband Dred, which is, he just got a new memorial, right, in Calvary. Before it was just a headstone, and now he's got a memorial. So really important national African-American history, but also important St. Louis connections. So I started talking in the fall of 2019. I went out and visited Greenwood and was amazed. I was expecting to see an overgrown mess, and it was clear, it was beautiful. And I remember Shelley like apologizing because like they hadn't been out there to be able to clear like weed whack around the headstones. And she's like, it usually looks better than this. And I was like, this looks great compared to like the photographs that I saw online. Like it was one of the most beautiful places in St. Louis, I think. Like I think anybody who goes to Greenwood just like falls in love with it because it is absolutely gorgeous. I like the way that, are you rallying it, Nick? I like the way that people created cemeteries at one time in history as a place for the families to come and relax and spend time with their loved ones. So Greenwood is that. It's beautiful. Now, we gave this presentation, Shelley and I gave this presentation for the Organization of American Historians earlier this year, and we talked about a key concern that's happening in education, which is the censorship of Black history. So this map here represents all of the states that have potentially introduced legislation to restrict the teaching of Black history in K through 12 education, but also on a college level. And Missouri is one of those states. So in response to like the censorship that we're seeing on a national level, I started thinking about what can we do to counteract that narrative, to push back against it. And I was able to attend a session with the descendant of Ida B. Wells Barnett, which if you guys know me, I'm a huge Ida B. Wells fan. She was an early anti-lynching activist in American history. So I was able to go to a Memphis lynching site presentation where they had her great-granddaughter give a presentation. I was able to ask her a question, like, what do we do in response to censorship? And her response was public history, right? There's always going to be pushback against teaching Black history in classrooms. It's been that way since the very beginning. So we need to invest in public history sites to be able to teach that story and preserve that history. And I think that goes hand in hand with what Greenwood has been doing to preserve the story of the 50,000 Americans who are buried there. And what I really like about Greenwood is it's not just the famous people. There are some famous people buried there, but it's a lot more because it's a story of ordinary Americans and their lives, and we can connect them to. So I teach history classes here on campus, and I've made my classes service learning. Has anybody taken a service learning class in here before? You guys ever heard of service learning? Good. Service learning is similar to community service. How many of you are A+ students or have done some community service at some point in your lives? Probably the vast majority of you, because Gen Z is very motivated and involved, which I appreciate. Thank you guys. But community service is a requirement of the A+ scholarship in Missouri. So you're probably familiar with community service. Community service is giving back to your community in some way, shape, or form. Now, service learning comes from a college or university that was looking at the state of, like, I'm trying to do the best way to say this. They were looking at their relationship with the community in which they lived, and they found that a lot of colleges and universities are often in cities or urban places where there's a lot, like surrounding areas is usually like experiencing a lot of problems. So if you look at like St. Louis University, for example, isn't that historic Mill Creek where SLU is? Yeah. So it's like on this like historic place of like significance for African Americans that got in the sense of urban renewal just like erased. An important neighborhood. And a lot of times these universities were kind of like oases in the middle of like blight. And their gates were locked. So they were like this safe place, but it was locked off from the community, and much of the community could not access what the university had to offer. So the people behind the campus compact who developed like this idea of service learning wanted to find a way to connect students back into the community where they live and learned, and make sure that they were providing services to the surrounding area and that they were benefiting the community and not just staying in their ivory towers. So they then came up with the idea of service learning, which is community service with a purpose, in the sense that it is applying what you're learning in the classroom to helping and serving the community. So this really grabbed me as a teacher. I was really like taken with this idea, but I could not figure out how feeding and walking dogs at a shelter would help the students learn in history classes until I saw the civic engagement wheel, which is one thing that they came up with. Because civic engagement is a form of community service. So then I was like, okay, well, maybe there's some like public history projects where my students could apply their research and analysis skills and even just their physical labor to preserve history. And Greenwood opened up a door to be able to do that. And we've got a lot of exciting projects coming up. I am now learning things that I didn't know I was ever going to learn, like including ArcGIS mapping and creating like these digital maps for Greenwood that potentially tells the story of the people living there. So if you are interested in this, I strongly encourage you to take a service learning class because it is just a really meaningful experience. It makes class so much more involved. So you complete 15 hours of a service learning project, and I'm doing several this semester in my history classes. And I have actually applied for a grant to work with another cemetery, a Black cemetery out here, which is called Smith Chapel Cemetery. Yes, there are Black cemeteries in St. Charles and St. Peter's and in the surrounding areas because Black people have always lived here. So these are opportunities to preserve that history and tell that history in a way that the rest of our society is censoring. And it's really valuable because these are American citizens. This is American history. And it's really cool history on top of everything else. And it's exciting. So here's some feedback that I've gotten from students who have done service learning projects. I just want to read them with you. Said, I believe I gave this project all I had to time, or with the time given. The amount of time I had to do so, I did not adjust for. Bad grammar, by the way, guys. I am actively looking for donations for benches to replace some that were vandalized at the cemetery. And who knows, maybe with my newfound confidence, I might build one for them. And this one says, it was terrible for someone to have, I'm just gonna pick this up for a second, for someone to have been buried and their family may not know where they are, or even if they didn't know they had a family member buried somewhere is terrifying. It is almost as if the individual was forgotten about, and that shouldn't be the case. My overall feeling about this project was that it is an incredible opportunity to get in touch and serve this community that has been put on the back burner for so long and is still recovering from such atrocities. This one says, I learned a lot about myself, which I didn't expect from the history class. My plan for the future is to maybe go back to Greenwood when they have time, and maybe in the spring I'll have to talk to Shelley and see, but I would love to go back. So I loved going through the records and learning about people. So one of the projects that we do besides like going out and like working on the grounds and helping Raphael maintain, because it's a constant struggle, maintaining the grounds, is to do research in the databases, to build the database, build the archives of people who are buried at Greenwood. And they have an ingenious strategy, I think, to find Greenwood burials, which is to look through the Missouri Death Certificate historical database. But unfortunately, the database is not searchable by cemetery, so you have to go through record by record and look for Greenwood burials. And it's tedious, but it's rewarding because you might find the only remaining record of that person being buried there, and that's making that connection for descendants to come find them in the future. So I'll go ahead and hand this over to Shelley so that she can talk more about it, but I really hope that you guys will potentially think about doing a service learning project with us because it is a really great opportunity.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Shelley Morris, but I'm not going to talk. I'm going to let Raphael tell our story, and then from there I'll pick up. I'll click through.
Oh, really? So where am I starting? Good morning. Everybody always asks how we got started doing what we do. And it's a little bit of a long story, but not that long. It was back in July of 2015. we were watching the news one morning, early one morning. I'd had carpal tunnel surgery, so I was off of my job. Shelley was getting ready for work. And there was a story on Channel 4, a guy that owns an auto shop across the street from Greenwood was on camera complaining about the conditions of this cemetery. How it was vastly overgrown, making the neighborhood look bad, making his business look bad, this, that, and the other. And he thought that something should be done about this horrible situation. So as I was watching that story, I told Shelley, I remember when I was about 8 or 9 years of age, riding down St. Louis Avenue with my dad, stopping in front of a cemetery, and he said, "You've got family in that cemetery." Of course, that went over my head at that time. But as I was watching this newscast, I said, "I bet you that's the same cemetery my dad was talking about." So they were trying to organize a group that following Saturday to see if anybody was interested in trying to turn around the fortunes of the cemetery. So I decided I was going to go out and take a look, and it might be something I might want to get involved with. So I got there early that Saturday morning. I was the first one there, parked in front of the cemetery, and I was just amazed how it was nothing but a forest. I'm talking 15 to 20 feet tall, so thick you couldn't see through it. You couldn't see a single headstone on the property. Later that morning, more people started to show up. I guess we had, I'm not looking at the slides here, I'm just, yeah. So like I said, later that morning, more people started to show up. And we all met up front by there's a church in the corner there. And we decided we're going to get together every Saturday and come out, start seeing if we could turn things around. So we agreed that that's what we were going to do. But you know how that goes. That went from every Saturday to every other Saturday to whenever we can get together. I told Shelley, I said, you know, this is no Saturday project. So I think I'm going to go ahead and retire and devote my time and attention to trying to turn the cemetery around. So that's what I did. And Shelley retired, I guess, about 8 or 9 months after I did. That 15 to 20 we started with had morphed down to just her and myself. But we didn't let that deter us. We just took one step at a time, systematically tried to work our way through and see how far we could get. The funny thing about it was after we had made this commitment, you know, to take this project on, we both wound up retiring to devote our time to this project. Both my parents had been dead for quite a while, and I was cleaning out the family home because one of my kids was going to come back and move into the home. And I ran across a Bible, and in the Bible I found some funeral burial cards. And looking through these cards, I discovered that I had great-grandparents and grandparents and all sorts of aunts and uncles buried at that cemetery. So it was at that point that it went from something maybe I should get involved with to something I've got to finish. So I committed to getting the job done. Cemetery is just under 32 acres. And I probably have cleared all 32 acres, but right now some of them are overgrown. So I'll say we probably have thoroughly cleared about 27, 28 of those acres. So we're very proud of that. But the hardest part, like I said, is maintaining those acres that you have cleared. We really enjoy and are committed to what we do. We take a lot of pride in what we do. We get phone calls almost on a daily basis from people all around the United States who have heard that we're clearing the cemetery and we're trying to reconnect with our loved ones. And that's probably the biggest joy that we get, is helping families connect with their loved ones. I don't know, it was probably 4 or 5 years before I found my great-grandmother's grave. I found her grave while I was looking for my grandfather's grave. And that was a really, really emotional event for me. I was no good the rest of the day. I just had to pack it up and go home after that. And it was some months later, I stumbled upon my grandfather's grave. So far, I found those two and an uncle. I still have another set of great-grandparents out there somewhere, as well as great-uncles and all sorts of aunts and uncles out there.
Okay. The one thing that Raphael didn't share, which is also a part of the research, he found his grandfather. Well, in some of the research, you know, when you go on Ancestry or newspapers.com or Fold3 or whatever, you can find these little nuggets of information about someone. What he didn't know was that his grandfather was the president of the, what was the baseball team? Okay, I didn't write that down. But he was the president.
Industrial Giants?
Yes, thank you. He was the president of a Negro League, and it was called the St. Louis Industrial Giants. Never knew that. And so we've been pulling that information up. And that's something that you might find yourself doing when you're out here with us. Oftentimes when we have volunteers come out, they're helping and they have their questions as we're working around and clearing things. And I'm able to share different things that I know about perhaps that particular person that's buried there. You know, that person was a professor over at Lincoln Institute, which is now Lincoln University, and how he led his life and his community work, but also how he died. Those are just little stories that they get to learn about. But also what really impacts them are the ones that we, like I say, have been uncovering, and no one knew that they were there. And it's so impactful what we're trying to do. One of the obstacles that we have really learned to overcome and get really great help, we created Greenwood Cemetery Preservation Association in 2016. It's a 501c3. And the importance behind that is that oftentimes when we're looking for help, grants and what have you, they want to know, are you a 501c3, which is a nonprofit? We are that. We've established ourselves with the state and making sure that you know, everything is up to snuff and that we're legally doing everything right. Because when people donate their time or their money or whatever, we want to be able to say we're doing the right thing for everybody involved. We've had the pleasure of collaborating with St. Charles Community College, other universities, AmeriCorps, Missouri Department of Conservation. We have friends everywhere now. You know, the different high schools, they've been coming out. Your school has been coming out, different students, and learning as much as they can, whether they're coming out if they can, or they may choose to help us with our research online, which is great because they can do that at any time of the day. But the thing is that collectively, we're starting to make real changes in the cemetery. I don't know where I am with my clicker, so as you can see, there are tons of volunteers, and as time goes on, we're starting to really make progress. Raphael said that we've cleared about, he's touched every section of the cemetery, every section of those 32 acres. However, during the summertime, we have to go back up to the front because that's more visible. And it has to be cut, and grass continues to grow. So we're not able to get to the eastern and the western sections. We do that during the wintertime. So we work all year round. So many of the students here have come out during those times that we layer up and we hit it. And it's a lot of fun on those Saturday mornings. We start out cold, but within an hour we're peeling off our clothes because we're working hard trying to get it done. The Missouri Botanical Garden, they have teamed with us on various occasions to clear honeysuckle and winter creeper. They've also are starting to help us build an arboretum. In order to have an arboretum, you have to have at least 25 species of trees. Now, chances are Greenwood has 25 species of everything out there in those 32 acres, but you never know. But they're helping us as we're taking down trees and removing trees that have fallen or that are at risk, which is another program. They're also helping to plant and making it even more beautiful and sustainable. They're providing food for the birds and the other animals because they're planting those type of trees which bear fruit. So there's a definite plan as far as what we're trying to do to bring back the cemetery.
Wait a second. In this picture, you see this moor here. I was so proud of that moor. When we first started, we had absolutely no money. And like I said, the cemetery is 32 acres. I used to push more to cut the grass. We got this little 42-inch Cub Cadet. Man, you should have seen me out there. I was so proud of that moor. And I was able to get so much done. But it's funny, like I said, that's a 42-incher, man. I thought I had died and gone to heaven. Then later on, I got a 50-inch. And I could not understand how I was ever able to tolerate that 42-inch. And then I got another mower, an even larger mower, so it's really been a bit of progression on helping with the maintenance of the cemetery. Those first couple of years were really rough. Like I said, we had no money. And Shelley and I went into our pockets on many occasions and spent our own monies to help us get to where we wanted to be. So, go ahead.
Thank you. Just more pictures of many volunteers that come out to help us. In my opinion, we can't do this without you. I know some cemeteries feel, some of the other Black cemeteries, they feel like, well, you don't want volunteers out there, you want a paid staff. Well, okay, that might sound good on paper, but a paid staff, where are you gonna get the money? You know, is that sustainable? And so those are questions that the three main Black cemeteries in St. Louis, which is Greenwood, which is the oldest one, which was established in 1874, Father Dixon's, which is a 12.5 cemetery down in Sappington and Crestwood area. They have about 12.5 acres. That was formed in 1903. And then Washington Park, which was the largest of the three cemeteries, but was subsequently cut down by different businesses and corporations that needed, such as the airport. But anyway, we all have different aspects as far as how we're trying to address this problem that we have and trying to restore the cemeteries. Again, we feel that volunteerism is much more impactful, it's much more sustainable because we're building relationships with everybody across the country. And it's not even just local, but it's been a pleasure, it's been a joy. And like Raphael said, there's nothing better to taking someone who wasn't able to see their mother's grave because you couldn't even get out the car to see where she was. So they would just blow a kiss in that direction. But now, I can actually take them to where their mother is buried. And that's because Raphael and the other volunteers have made it possible. It's very, very rewarding work. And if you should decide to come out to help us, you will be greeted warmly, and you're so appreciated, whatever you choose to do with us. There are different ways that we do need help. Like we were saying, the physical work, which is service work, coming out perhaps on a Saturday morning, or whatever it is that you and I agree on, because I will definitely be there when you're there. You might be helping Raphael trim around headstones, or pull up weeds, or cut down limbs, or lop limbs, shall I say, or whatever it is that our need might be at that time. And it's dirty work, but it's good work. Also, too, of course, the online research, and that is what Grace alluded to, helping to build our database. Of that, like I said, we have about 36,000 on our database. But when you go through the Missouri Digital Deaf Research, or deaf certificate, shall I say, you're able to see whether or not that person is in Greenwood. But then you start learning all sorts of things about that individual, what they did for a living, were they a veteran, Civil War or whatever, were they a musician, where they lived, did they die of some disease, where they lived or where they worked, how did it affect their lives. And so those are things that you learn about the various people that are buried there, and you want to know more. So we need help there. And Grace was also talking about the ArcGIS. Now, I'm used to using AutoCAD, but ArcGIS puts me on a whole nother level. And so being able to drop a pin where that person is and then add a note about that individual, that's also new for me, but it's exciting. And so some of you may already be versed in that. We could definitely use your help. It's a new technology that we really do need it. So I know I'm just rambling, so I'm gonna move on.
Can I share one story?
Please.
We were talking about students getting excited about finding people, interesting people. There was an example last fall, I guess. I was working with one of my students, and she found a burial of a young man who died. And then she noticed a little bit later, there's another one that died the same day, and both of them had died of drowning. So then she's like, what is going on with this? She's like, I think it's strange that they both died on the same day and they're both buried at Greenwood. So then we did a little bit of a deeper dive, and we found out that there was an accident at a Boy Scout camp where three boys one boy started to drown, and then his friends jumped in to try to save him, and then they all ended up dying, and so it was a tragedy. But two of them were buried at Greenwood, and it became like this larger story for us. We just connected to it because they were I think they were like 14 or 15. And it was just so sweet. I mean, it was sad that they died, but like they tried to save each other, right? So it's a really compelling story. And then it was interesting because we looked through the white newspapers because we had access to them. We could not find any stories. But then Shelley connected us to the St. Louis American, I guess, which was a black newspaper. And we were able to find like this profile about the boys and how their families viewed them as being heroes. And it was just a really neat insight into the community. It was a tragedy, but it was also just like really compelling because they're not that much younger than a lot of the students. So that was just one example of how our research uncovered this larger story that then you guys had in the cemetery.
Thank you. Well, like I said, there are really so many great stories. Greenwood was recently listed on the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom. In that particular application, they wanted us to spotlight those who had something to do with the Underground Railroad. Well, we have Harriet Scott, the wife of Dred Scott, and her work as a freedom suit petitioner. We also have Lucy Ann Delaney, who at the age of 14, actually at the age of 12, she pursued her freedom in 1842. She subsequently won it in 1844. She went on to write the only slave narrative of her experiences there. She also became a Masonic founder. We also, in the application, talked about Charlton Tandy. He was a civil rights activist and an attorney during the 1800s who helped the exodusters as they came up from the southern states such as Mississippi, Texas, Alabama, and they were trying to get to the promise of new land and freedom and better lives in Kansas and Nebraska. When they arrived on the shores of the banks of the Mississippi in 1879, they only had what they could carry. Some of them didn't have shoes. So if you can imagine being on the banks of the Mississippi in February, in March, you know, they were not prepared. This gentleman went around to the various churches and other social networks that were available to the city, trying to raise money. And others like him, like Moses Dixon, some of you may have heard of him. Collectively, they were able to raise money in order to see those folks on to the West. So those are stories that are really, really significant, and that's why, one of the reasons why we were placed on the list for Network to Freedom. We've been given a lot of recognition, and it's so appreciated, and it's just really just been a joy.
One of the, Rosa Parks.
Yes.
Oh, wait.
Oh, okay. This past January, we received the Rosa L. Parks Award for Meritorious Service for the Community. It's just been great.
There's some blushing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, as you can see over here to the right, we just recently had that for Harriet Scott's monument. Now, that is her monument honoring her. This was placed before we actually found out where she was buried. How we found out that information? Her grandson died about 4 months after Harriet died in 1876. It was then that they opened up her grave and placed him in her coffin with him. And that was when they marked down the location. And those records we have, and that's how we know where she's buried. And like I said, this past October, we were able to set a headstone in her actual burial spot. And as you can see, it's changed. This is what it looks like today. It's absolutely beautiful. In some areas, you think like, oh wow, this is great. And then you get to a place like Section M, which is further to the east, and it's like a valley, and it's like National Geographic. It's gorgeous.
I always describe it like if you've ever been to Shaw Nature Area, which is the Missouri Botanical Garden, has created like all these different like regions. Like there's like woodland area, there's like a plains area. It's like you go everywhere you go in Greenwood, it's a different like geographical feature, I guess. Beautiful.
The one thing I do want to say, just recently, and Raphael, you might want to talk about the road.
We have a gravel road that is a main entrance to the cemetery. And every year, the road washes out, you know, when the heavy rains come every spring and in the summer sometimes. And year after year, I'd get so frustrated, you know, with that, and I'd have to haul gravel in from someplace and try to fill these ruts in because they were like 2 feet deep and maybe 2 feet wide, and you couldn't even think about driving down there because you'd tear your car up and people couldn't walk down the road. So I'd get so frustrated. And this was last spring. That was another one of those days when I was really pissed, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. So I had thought about this engineering company that had come out a couple of years prior to do a day of service. So I thought maybe if I reach out to them, they might be able to give me a couple $100 worth of gravel or something to fill these ruts in. So I made a phone call, and they said, sure, we'll come out, we'll send an engineer out to take a look and see what you need. So a couple of days later, engineer pulls up, she gets out of her car. I take her down the hill to see these massive ruts. She takes one look at it, and she says, you need this paved. And I said, you're damn right I need this paved. So that started a conversation. They go back, they reached out to Engineers Without Borders, who in turn partnered with Washington University, UMSL, MSD, American Chemistry Council, and I'm missing anybody? Aspire. Anyway, this couple $100 of gravel I was looking for is morphed into a project probably approaching somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000. Yeah. And they're footing the bill for everything. Yeah. So you never know what you can get until you ask. So.
That's so true. And that project just got started 2 weeks ago. So when you come out, you will see that actively going on. Supposedly it will be completed in November. But the one thing I failed to mention was Greenwood is now celebrating its 150th anniversary. It'll culminate with the gala celebration at the Missouri History Museum, October 19th, from 6:30 to 9:30. And so if you're free and available to come out, check out our website or our Facebook page, and you'll see the event on Eventbrite, and they'll take you through what you'll need to do to join us. But it's really been wonderful to be able to tell the story, to be able to bring back the families, to partner with various groups around the St. Louis area, the state, and to making it such a place that it is, hopefully it will be sustainable. We are starting to formulate, trying to get together an endowment. That's something that we're actively working on, and hopefully we'll get that going and be able to really create something real for the cemetery.
One of the things I forgot to mention is, this is actually pretty common for a bunch of Black cemeteries, is chronic dumping on the site. And did you just tell me that you had like a new solution to deal with that?
Actually,
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted, can you explain like what people are doing with dumping?
oh my God.
Especially in the early years, you could go out there and there was no telling what you were gonna find. I would find just about every car part imaginable in the cemetery. And I would always say, well, I found everything but an engine. Found an engine. There's a little 4-cylinder engine. There's one section, we had Great Rivers come out, Great Rivers Greenway, and we were gonna have a day of cleanup. There's this one section where we pulled 65 tires out of it. Microwaves, refrigerators, television sets, mattresses, toilets, all sorts of stuff. And the job is hard enough trying to do what we do, just dealing with nature. But when you're constantly battling the illegal dumping that was taking place, it always made my job that much harder. It's not nearly as bad now as it was, but you still have, moments when you go out there and find all sorts of stuff. But
Like entire houses out there, right?
oh,
Like a foreclosure?
yeah,
Everything?
there was this one section where we got to believe that it was a foreclosure of or eviction of some sort, because it was like a whole house worth of goods dumped down the hill, which sits above the cemetery, so we just rolled down the hill into the cemetery. So,
I don't believe it comes from just the neighborhood. I think people come from other areas throughout the city. It's a spot to unload. One of the things that we are slowly doing is making a change with the community. As Raphael and AmeriCorps, they were clearing the western section of the cemetery. And they made it so that you could actually see across this burial area. And neighbors were coming out saying that they've never been able to see into the cemetery, let alone the other houses on the other side. And one gentleman came out and told Raphael that, he's been stopping people from dumping. It's like we're creating a pride in the community.
I just also wanted to say one more thing before we open up into questions, if you guys have any, or if you guys have anything else that you want to say. I just wanted to connect it back into Democracy Days, because this is a Democracy Days event. The story of Black cemeteries and the unequal treatment that they get, like with chronic dumping and like with the lack of regard for like memorializing the loved ones. Like these are people's family members that are buried here. That is part of the larger story of democracy in America and the lack of rights that African Americans have received on the part of the government. So I view working towards restoration as a way of like restoring that, democratic, I don't know, like rights of all Americans. Like everybody deserves to have their final resting place memorialized, and the juxtaposition of white cemeteries, which do include black burials. Like, it's like what the original guy, Kruger, like he was originally working at St. Peter's Cemetery, and he noticed there are black burials there, but a lot of the white cemeteries would restrict the number of black burials that could be there, and they had them in separate segregated sections, and he saw a need in the community to have a burial place that wasn't just like a potter's field or a place where unmarked graves were dumped. So it's like a lot of people from lower socioeconomic classes, like they couldn't afford like to mark their graves, but they would still come visit their loved ones, like to have that place to come back and be buried. So if you are working out here, you're working towards the preservation of democracy for these people, like to make them, recognize that they mattered and that their lives were significant, and sort of rectify the injustice that was done in United States history. So I just wanted to pull us full circle. It's the teacher in me who wanted to emphasize the democracy for us. Does anybody have any questions for Raphael or Shelley or me?
Hi, I'm sorry if you've already said this. If we wanted to volunteer with your organization, what exactly would we need to do, or how would we contact you in order to assist on various Saturdays or Sundays?
You can always follow us on our website, which is greenwoodstl.org, and there will be a telephone number or an email there that you can send us a note. I also have brochures and our business cards with us, and you can contact us that way. We also have a Facebook page, and you can reach out to us, message us in that way as well. So I'd like to think that we're pretty accessible to people.
We also do a week of service on campus where we organize an opportunity for you to go out and volunteer at Greenwood with other SCC people. So that's usually in November. Mara Voracek Warren will probably be posting information about that soon. My classes are going to go take a day to volunteer there. So if you would like to volunteer with other SCC people, like you could join us on one of those days. I'm planning one in October and then probably again in November for the week of service. But yeah, definitely contact Shelley. She'll get you connected.
The one thing I did forget to mention was that because Greenwood goes back to 1874, there's so many people that are buried there that had something to do with the history of St. Louis City and our nation. And so when we unfold these things, we're unfolding so much history, be it might tell you about a neighborhood or a particular company. And so there's so many opportunities just to learn more about St. Louis and the metropolitan region. Not just St. Louis, but also St. Charles County as well.
I think it's interesting about the black morticians, the undertakers, the death certificates.
Yes. There's a lot of information on the death certificates, so if you do help us with that, you're going to find it pretty fascinating, the different things that you'll see and how they would note what happened to that individual or what have you.
And a lot of medical terminology.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Also, these are important skills that historians do. Like if you take a service learning class and work with Greenwood, or if you just volunteer with Greenwood, that's something that is higher level, like history archival work. So like students, like we're doing stuff like that I did when I did an internship, for example, like a history internship at an archive. So that's like real marketable skills that you can do as an undergraduate, which is not, you don't really get a lot of opportunity to do that kind of work as an undergraduate student. Like most of that stuff is saved for either your senior year or for when you go on to graduate school. So it's a really neat opportunity to take those classes and have it be on your transcript, but you're gonna get some marketable skill. I think one of the funniest skills that students are learning is how to read cursive, because I guess they're not teaching cursive anymore in school. And so that's been fun to teach my students how to do that, because if you're working with historical documents, you're gonna have to learn how to read cursive, because all of it is handwritten. It's definitely much easier to do the death certificates when you're in like the 50s where they typed it. Yeah.
Another thing, if you are doing research, to be looked upon as being credible, they want documentation, actual documentation from 1857 or whatever it is that you're looking at. Various things that you're applying to, say, like applications for a grant or recognition. They want real work, not just you heard it, or you read it in a newspaper. They want actual document. And so that's another thing that you definitely learn to do is researching in that level.
Anybody else?
Yes, please.
I have a question. So Grace specifically, if there are students out here who want to take a U.S. history class with you so that they have this service learning component in lieu of more traditional, I know it takes the place of some traditional coursework, and they're interested in, putting their history skills in the context and all this. Is it any U.S. history class with you that does this? Could you just give them like a little bit of insight for spring if they want to sign up for a class with you?
So if you want to, I've been starting this semester, I've been doing class projects where everybody does the same project. Because I think that's easier. It gets a little overwhelming when you got to choose your own history project. But you just look for the designation of a history course that has S at the end of it. So for example, I'm teaching History 101 06 S, and the S designates service learning. I am going to be teaching 3 face-to-face classes in the spring that will have the service learning designation, and also probably 3 in next fall that will have the service learning designation. But I believe that if you're not in a service learning class, I think you could, did they still do a contract? Do you know? I'm not on the service learning committee.
I'm not on that committee right now, so I don't know.
Okay. So it might still be possible, but so far, in our our course schedule, if a course is listed with a section number that has an S at the end of it, that means service learning, so you can sign up for that. But all of my face-to-face classes, because I also teach online, all of my face-to-face classes in the fall will have the service learning designation in the spring.
Thank you.
Sorry to any students who signed up for it without realizing that.
We would like to thank the college for inviting us here today, and it's so appreciative. This year we did something a little different as far as talking about Democracy Days and just telling you about our service work that is so important. Normally we give history presentations, be it about some of the industries or the certain people that are buried in Greenwood, such as the Pullman Porters and other groups of folks. So this one here was a little bit different, a little bit more relaxed, not as rigid, but it was still fun to be able to share our journey with you guys. And I hope you do decide to come out, at least visit. I'll take you on a tour.
Also, if you're interested in seeing that, this is actually Greenwood's 3rd time coming out for Democracy Days. They were just here last year, and they did a history-based presentation last year on the Pullman Porters. So if you go to the Democracy Days website, stchaz.edu/Democracy Days, you can see last year's presentation if you're interested in learning more about the history of Greenwood and some of the research that they've done.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone. I guess we will end it there. Thanks for coming here.